Okay, so today we're going to dive into something pretty interesting happening with these large language models. Everyone's talking about them, right?
Right.
We've got Meta's Llama 4 and DeepSeek's V3 on the table. Now, you'd think,
Yeah.
right, that a company like Meta with, all the resources in the world would just naturally be leading the pack.
Yeah, seems like a safe bet.
But from what we've been seeing, it's not quite that
Yep.
simple. DeepSeek's V3 is turning out to be a real contender, maybe even outperforming Llama 4 in some areas.
Potentially, yeah.
So the big question we're going to try and untangle today is why? What's going on here? We're going to dig into, how they each got developed, what's going on under the hood, so to speak, with their architecture, and how they're using all those resources. Maybe that's a key part of this performance difference. What do you think?
Yeah, it could be. Looking at the timelines, the first thing that jumps out is that, well, Llama 4's journey hasn't exactly been smooth sailing. They were aiming for an earlier release, but it seems like, the model just wasn't cutting it in some pretty basic areas like math, logical reasoning, even just holding a decent conversation.
Huh.
So that kind of forced Meta to, well, rethink things, go back to the drawing board a bit.
Yeah.
I think it's a good reminder that even with all the resources in the world, if the fundamental performance isn't there, it can really throw a wrench in the works.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you can have all the fancy tools and equipment, but if you don't have the basic skills down, you're not building a house.
Exactly.
So they took a look around, saw what others were doing, DeepSeek being one of them, according to what we've been reading,
Mm,
and they decided to try this mixture of experts thing.
right. Right.
Now, for those of you who aren't, AI experts, it's kind of like this. Instead of one huge AI trying to learn everything at once, they break it down into smaller parts. Each part focuses on one specific thing, like language or coding or logic.
Yeah, specialization.
Right, exactly. And that specialization can, in theory, lead to, better performance and also make things more efficient.
More bang for your buck, so to speak. But the interesting thing is, even with this change, it looks like Llama 4's release is still getting pushed back. I think it's slated for sometime later in April next year, which just goes to show that making this kind of architectural shift is, well, it's not a walk in the park.
Makes sense. It's a complex beast, right? AI. So, okay, that's Llama 4. What about DeepSeek's V3? They also went with this mixture of experts approach, but things seem to be going a bit differently for them.
Yeah, quite differently. They seem to have really nailed this whole efficiency thing. From what I've been reading, their implementation is really smart about how it uses resources. It only activates the parts of the model that are actually needed for a specific task.
So it's like if it needs to write code, it turns on the code writing part. And if it needs to, I don't know, translate languages, it turns on the translation part.
Exactly. And that doesn't just make it better at those individual tasks, it also saves a ton of computing power, which means lower costs. It's a much more agile and resource conscious approach. They're not just throwing processing power at the problem, they're being strategic about it.
So even though they're both working with the same basic idea, the mixture of experts, DeepSeek seems to have figured out how to actually make it work efficiently in a way that Meta hasn't quite cracked yet. And maybe the timing of when they adopted this approach plays a role. Like maybe Meta was playing catch up and DeepSeek had a head start.
Yeah, could be. And now, this whole thing about resources is really interesting, especially when you look at the money involved. Everyone always talks about how you need these massive investments to build these cutting edge AI models.
Right, like it's an exclusive club only for the billionaires.
But then you look at DeepSeek and it challenges that whole idea.
So how much did they spend on V3?
The estimate is somewhere around $5.6 million.
5.6 million. That's nothing compared to what some of these companies are spending.
Exactly. It's a drop in the bucket. And we're talking about a model that's performing really well, right up there with the big boys. And they did it for a fraction of the cost. To put it in perspective, some of these other models, they're spending anywhere from $100 million to $1 billion.
A billion. That's just mind-boggling. So how did DeepSeek pull that off? They didn't skimp on the talent, did they?
Doesn't seem like it. It looks like they were just really smart about it. They didn't use the absolute latest, most expensive hardware, and they streamlined their training process. Basically, they found a way to be incredibly efficient without sacrificing performance.
It's like finding a shortcut that actually works, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really challenges the assumption that you need the biggest, most expensive toys to play in the AI sandbox. Sometimes it's more about how you use what you have.
Which makes you wonder about Meta, right? They've clearly poured a ton of money into Llama 4, but it doesn't seem like they're getting that much more in return, at least not yet. It really highlights how important it is to be strategic with your resources. It's not just about how much you spend, it's about spending it wisely.
Absolutely. Throwing money at a problem doesn't always solve it. So we've talked about how these models were developed, how they're structured, and how much they cost. Now let's get to the real test. How well do they actually perform? And to figure that out, we need to look at the benchmarks.
Right, those standardized tests that everyone in the AI world uses to compare models.
Yeah.
It's like the SATs for AI.
Exactly. And this is where DeepSeek's V3 really shines. It's consistently scoring high in these global rankings, often beating out models from much bigger, more established players.
That's impressive. So what areas is it particularly good at?
Reasoning and coding, specifically, it's really good at those, which, puts it in direct competition with some of the industry leaders like OpenAI.
Meanwhile, Llama 4 seems to be having a bit more trouble. Mixed results, some internal reports showing weaknesses in those same areas, reasoning and coding, where DeepSeek is excelling.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark contrast. It really shows you how effective DeepSeek's methods are and how much Meta is still struggling to catch up.
It's like they're both running the same race, but DeepSeek is already sprinting ahead while Meta is still trying to tie their shoelaces.
Something like that. But zooming out a bit, I think DeepSeek's success really tells us something important about AI development. It's not just about who has the most money or the biggest team. Sometimes it's about being innovative, efficient, and just plain smart about how you approach the problem.
And for Meta, this whole situation is a wake-up call. They need to be more adaptable, more agile, and focus not just on the tech itself, but also on how efficiently they're developing it.
Right. The future of AI is probably going to depend on companies being able to combine cutting-edge technology with smart, efficient development practices. That's how you make real progress that's sustainable and actually has an impact.
So to wrap things up, what we've seen with Llama 4 and DeepSeek's V3 is pretty fascinating. Even though Meta has a huge advantage in resources, DeepSeek is outperforming them right now. And it seems like that comes down to how well they've implemented this mixture of experts, architecture, how efficiently they've used their resources, and maybe even just having a smoother development process.
Absolutely. And it raises a really interesting question. What does this mean for the future of AI development? If a smaller company like DeepSeek can compete with the giants, does that mean we're entering a new era where ingenuity and efficiency are more important than just throwing money at the problem? Could we see more breakthroughs coming from smaller, more agile teams? Something to think about, isn't it?
It definitely is. And that's something for all of you to ponder as well. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.